I discovered music through the Beatles. So I was really young. And the Beatles brought out From Me to You very early on. Loved that. And then just fell in love with the Beatles, really. And that was the first concert that I ever saw. So I made my mother take me to the Amidst to see them. Then when I left school, I went to see bands like Led Zeppelin, The Who, The Stones, Alice Cooper, those types of people. And then a friend suggested I go to see David Bowie. So I wasn't a fan of Bowie's, but I went to see him at the Hammersmith Odeon as Ziggy Stardust, and that really set the stage for the rest of my life because I'd never seen anything like it. So there was mime, theatre and rock music all in one show. So I decided that was what I wanted to do, was to photograph people like him. David was the one I really wanted to work with the most. He was just something obviously special about him, and the way he performed, his persona on stage, and then the difference off stage. On the Serious Moonlight Tour, no one had ever seen those kind of pictures of him before. In retrospect now, we've seen loads. But at that point, no one really saw David Bowie hang out in the dressing room, and we travelled together. We were in the same hotels. We went out a lot together. We were at the show, the soundcheck, etc. So you spend a lot of time with someone, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to document someone like him in depth, to a degree that never really been done before, which is what happened. And well, when I first went on tour with him, it was David Bowie, the Enigma, and I wasn't sure how he was going to react. It was a huge tour. It was David's first. It was his biggest tour, his biggest album, his biggest single. I was first invited out to rehearsals in Houston, Texas, before obviously the tour began. Minutes after I arrived, I heard over the PA David go, "Dennis," and I obviously assumed it was someone else. So he called me down to the front and said, what do you think of the songs? Which songs do you think we should play? And all this. So that was him putting me at ease. But then each day at those rehearsals, he would go and box with a trainer. So I went along with him each day to do that. And that's then how he figured out whether he could put up with me for longer. Really, that's how it started. And when I look back at the pictures, I can see that his bodyguard stood quite close to him in those pictures, and then started to fade away into the distance as we got to know each other. I thought that maybe he was going to be a bit precious, a bit camera shy, and that I'd go on this tour and I'd be hanging around most of the time doing nothing until he allowed me to take pictures. And in fact, it was exactly the opposite. It came a point where he was nagging me to take pictures because he said, what about this? What about that? This will be amazing. And it's really not what I expected. So I got way more access. I got 100% access. So walk into the dressing room whenever you want, or up to his hotel room. And it meant I was really documenting him. There's a picture in the book of David reading the paper in Singapore on his daybed, cigarette in his mouth and his white jacket. And that's the way he'd been when I walked into the room. So, of course, he put the paper down. I said, just carry on. And so that really was what he was doing at that moment. And they were the kind of things I like. I don't like setting up photographs. This is the press conference before the Serious Moonlight Tour. I didn't know David at all, although I know about 10 other photographers. And so I went around to the others. Again, a bit like those live pictures. I mean, a picture of David is one thing, but doing the other way around and getting him with all the photographers seemed much more interesting. So that's what I did. And then he turned around and I got that shot. This is in Australia, where it didn't have the private plane. So everyone in the picture, all the heads I can tell are all us lot. But it was a commercial flight, so there were other people on it. And David was sitting across the aisle. So I just called his name out and just took the picture when he turned around. That was a totally natural reaction, which I really liked. This is David at rehearsals again at the beginning of the tour. Again, I hardly knew him, so I'm keeping my distance. Obviously, it's close. And the guitarist there he's not in the picture here, but it's Stevie Ray Vaughan, who was then dropped before the actual tour began. This is rehearsals in Texas, and Stevie Ray Vaughan is in that picture. And it just shows the layout of the stage with the columns, which wasn't a huge thing to me, but I suppose it breaks the stage up and it created lighting effects, and David appeared inside them at one point. David smoked vast amounts. This is him at rehearsals, so it'll be one of the first pictures I did of him on the tour. I just like this picture because the flame and the smoke from the cigarette are so clear. And this is David this is his everyday look. At the beginning of the tour, the first time he pushed his own trolley, I didn't know how unusual that was. So David had a legendary PA who was on the tour for the whole thing, and I was getting my bags off the carousel, and David had his bags on his trolley. And he said, "Aren't you going to take a picture?" And I went, "Why?" He said, "Well, it's David pushing his trolley. He never pushes his trolley. You should always have your camera available." I said, "What, is David going to pull out his guitar and sing us a song?" I mean, I don't know how I stayed on the tour after that day, because I then said to her, "If you want to take a picture, you buy a camera." And I'm not sure how I got away with it, but I did. But I wasn't used to having someone wanting me to take pictures of every single thing they did. This is David at Ullevi Stadium in Gothenburg. Because of that stadium, I think people would play there rather than in Stockholm, because it's a big stadium, 60-odd thousand. And I'd been there the previous year with the Stones, and it's, from the stage, it looks amazing because the roof curves around above the audience and it looks absolutely immense. And I think that's David kicking a globe out, an inflatable earth, out into the audience, which reminds me of the show early on in the tour. Being a fan, I knew all the lyrics to all his songs, and he did a song called Hang On To Yourself, which is very fast and very complicated. And I didn't know him very well at this point. It was only about 5 shows in, and he kept getting the words wrong. So I said, "Look, I've got to say, you're getting the words wrong. It should be this." "Oh, okay." So come out the next day, and then the song's about to start. And David looks at me and nods as if to say, "I'm going to get it right this time." And at the exact second, that huge globe hit me on the head. And so he burst out laughing. I messed the song up again. So from then on, he dropped it for most of the tour because it was too difficult. Ullevi Stadium again. Taken just behind David when he came to the back of the stage. And I just, I like the look as though he's crying or something. There's one song, Ashes to Ashes, where he rubs his eyes. And it's just interesting to have the stadium in the distance and David at the front, but it's actually the back, with all the other musicians. There was a show just like that in Japan where the promoter came up to me during the show, and he's very strict and above board, and he said, "A girl's fallen in the audience. If she's killed, I'll have to resign." So he said, "Can you get Dave to stop the show?" So that's what we did, and that's what it reminds me of, because it looked really similar. There's the plane, which is, it's basically a huge apartment. This was a 707, which seated 125 people, I think. And at the front were some huge seats where you could just sit, like business class, first class. And then a bedroom at the front and a bedroom at the back and a dining room. And then this was sort of the lounge area. This is after a show. At the front there is Carmine, who's the bass player, who's a legendary bass player, who's worked a lot with David. This is Cracked Actor, the song. He'd been doing this for a long time, of doing a scene from Hamlet as part of the song. So he had the skull. And I chose this actual picture because it happened every night. I chose this one because both of them are exactly parallel. So that just appealed to me. This was the night of the show. The next day was the day we went to California for the US Festival, and I knew Duran Duran really well, and they were recording in Cannes at a villa that they were renting, and they said, "If we come to the show, could you introduce us to David?" So I did, but one of them, who isn't in the picture, Roger Taylor, said recently, "Where was I? Why am I in the picture?" So I don't know why they weren't, but they look very happy at having met David at last, because obviously he was a huge hero of theirs. This is the Forum in Los Angeles. This is how everyone was sitting there. It wasn't as though I lined anyone up. And it's David and Bette Midler. They were really good friends. Michael Jackson came backstage to the show, and that was the first time that he'd met David, and I think actually the only time. And then next to him is Cher's sister, and then the real Cher sitting at the end. And then Timothy Hutton, the actor, is then the next one along, who's not quite in the picture there, but this is one of my few posed set-up pictures, and it's because the press person had asked for a portrait. So David came to my room and I had a light, and I just banged off a few pictures in my hotel room. I'd never really had him looking like that before, where he's sort of just staring straight into the camera with nothing else to do. So it was fun to have done it. It was one of my rare portraits. So David did the 3 Milton Keynes, 65,000 a day, ragingly hot. And as I say, I wanted to, it obviously lent itself to taking a different sort of picture. So I climbed, it looked as though I'm a lot higher than I was. It was only about 10 feet off the ground, really, but it changed that angle so much that instead of the audience looking like this in the distance, they came up above David like that. It just made it look immense. This is Berlin, and there's a legendary photographer called Helmut Newton who has departed, and he wanted to do a session for Vanity Fair of famous people in their bedrooms. Well, of course, David was on tour. So he did a picture of David sitting on the edge of his bed. But David had said that he could only do the session if I was there as well. So, again, which I thought was really sweet. We did the pictures, and of course then the next day Helmut Newton's agent was on the phone saying the picture I'd used was his. Well, in fact, it was mine, just because they're identical. And that was quite a moment. Over the 2 long tours I did with him, we did a lot of stuff in Berlin that was interesting. But Helmut Newton was a legendary photographer, so I had 2 legends in the room at that point. Singapore shopping mall. Apparently this is a key photograph in the new Moon Age Daydream documentary, because at the David Bowie convention recently, the director of the film was there, and I didn't know that. He came up and saw that picture and went, oh my God, this is how it opens, and we've actually got original footage of that, because that was part of the documentary again. David walking through the shopping mall at night. But the way the photograph has come out, it's a bit more Blade Runner, because I left the colours as blue and white, whereas if I'd corrected it, colour corrected it, it would have come out more orange, which would have been really boring. This is David in Singapore, and the documentary is being shot, Ricochet documentary, and so David just wandered around. They filmed him, I photographed him, and this was just a back street that we wandered through in Singapore, and David joined in the football with the children. Again, it was a David Bowie I'd never seen and no one else had ever seen either, so and on top of the locations, so everything about it was great. This is David at the meal that we'd had, and we were sitting on the floor. This shows David from the waist up, and our table was down on that floor. And David obviously arrived wearing that hat, which I hadn't found amusing, but obviously after a few sakis, and he stood up and put it on. He looked such a cheeky chappy that I decided that it definitely required a picture. One of my favourites, I only discovered a few years ago. I hadn't chosen this at the time, and it's just me and David in a boat on the river in Bangkok. That was probably my best day of the tour. And we started at 3 a.m. I went down the river. Bangkok was flooded, so we had all the houses that would normally be by the river were in the river. So we went into some of these people's houses and saw how they lived, and David played various instruments with them, and we had lunch on a boat that just pulled up next to us. Sounded very dodgy, but it was all fine. Bought a chicken off that boat and had lunch, and it was such an amazing day. This is a picture of David backstage at the Chinese Street Theatre in Singapore, and women play men and men play women, etc. David, I have another picture in the book of David in the audience, looking very tall compared to the locals, because no one knew who he was. And there's a guy there with his bicycle watching next to David. So again, this was the most we ever got out and about and saw things we would never get to see. And again, this is something I would never have seen if he hadn't, gone along to it. So this is Singapore at Raffles Hotel, and we were having afternoon tea, and someone grabbed the camera, took a picture. What I just find really odd is the way we both leaning into the picture. It's just kind of odd. But I love that picture of David, again, because it's such a cheeky chappy. Raffles Hotel. So I just love being there. David was wearing his, the perfect outfit with all linen, with his Panama hat, and it was quite empty. So just sat the stairs there, and I got the whole thing in rather than just him. So with all the woodwork everywhere, the natural lights, and just really loved it. Loved being there. That's Serious Moonlight. So that's from the plane, and looked out the window, and there was the beautiful sunset, and there was the moon. Got to have that one in the book. I sort of felt free at the end of the tour when we went to these areas, and so did he. Being through this immense tour, he'd had all this, so much focused on him. Pressure, it is pressure, kind of, but It was great for him. He'd become rich, he'd become famous, I mean, everything, popular. But being David Bowie then, he wanted to sort of turn his back on it later on. We kept in touch, but the thing with, he didn't live in England, so he lived in Switzerland during this tour, and then later moved to New York. So he lived in Switzerland the whole time that I spent with him. He was also single the whole time I spent with him. So he had been married before and after. He had a different life after the tours I did with him, really, and we didn't really stay in touch that much. Some things that I wanted to do, or something that he was doing that he wanted me to do, but not a huge amount. And the last time I saw him was in the mid-90s. So, 15 years before he died. It's a different world now for photographers, especially with any performing art, because you can do it all yourself. You can do it with a phone and get the most amazing results. As I said, people hadn't seen David like that before, but had that been now, he'd be on Instagram every day, and there wouldn't have been this enigmatic David Bowie. And now people, I think you get to see too much of them, and there are too many pictures around. But if someone went on tour and did what I did, and they weren't squirting the pictures all over social media, then it could be really, really interesting. But I think that moment might have passed. I think it's rock music itself has changed, and part of it's disappeared, and the David Bowie's all gone. There are no replacements. Anyway, I won't go into it all.